Thank you, Chair. Minister, a key driver of inflation is the cost of fuel. It feeds into everything, absolutely everything. Now, it's true to say that this is EU-wide and that the war has contributed, but we have our own fiscal tools that we can deploy here to bring inflation under control. The truth is, every country is dealing with the war. Not every country is like Ireland. We are unique. We are an island. We've almost at full employment, you could say, and yet we've not taken one measure to deal with costs. Economist David McWilliams has said we need extraordinary measures in extraordinary times. Control the controllables. He says take away the excise on fuel and reduce inflation accordingly. In fact, the government has instead added tax by increasing the carbon tax. But I don't care what the tax is called, whether it's carbon, whether it's a NORA levy or whether it's excise. It's tax. Remove it. Because the tax is causing cost-push inflation. And we're getting into a spiral of demand-pull inflation. You're not solving the problem, Minister. The proposal to reduce inflation through this measure is a realistic one. Fuel is the lowest common denominator of any economy, and even more so in Ireland, as we are an island dependent on transport of every kind. We import most of our energy. We're totally exposed here, Minister, yet you have done nothing except add to the cost of living by adding carbon. And the reality is that this probably suits the Greens. Your policy is driving demand destruction because people will have no choice but to stop using or reduce to bare minimums fuel and energy. And in response, you will say you're saving the planet. You'll say it's a just transition. What's just about people freezing in their homes? What is just about being pushed into abject poverty? What's just about not being able to go to work? Because it no longer makes financial sense to work, while the price of everything in the supermarket goes up in price. You could, if you wanted, cut excise on the fuel, but you won't. You're gouging the people by increasing taxes instead. Minister, is it the case that this so-called just transition that we speak of has driven people into penury in rural Ireland? And whatever chance we had of a just transition without a war, we certainly have no chance now. But to continue with this high tax regime, where we as an economy are extremely reliant on fuel and the transport of goods, this policy will contribute in a negligible way to the world targets on carbon emission reductions, whilst we see our squeezed middle opt for unemployment benefits rather than work. In particular, the proposal cited this week, if they're anything to go by, the squeezed middle in rural Ireland, well then, where there are no transport alternatives, Minister, they would absolutely be financially better off were they unemployed and join the social welfare queue. Minister, do you realise what's happening?
I think I realise, more than anyone else as Energy Minister, as Transport Minister, I absolutely realise the need for us to protect our people through these extraordinary times. War setting the price. Now, thankfully, the price of oil, Brent, has gone down to about $101 a barrel yesterday. It had been up as a high at 120, 130 or in recent weeks. So there will be some in 2 weeks' time, that slight reduction, but it's beyond compare high. The price of gas is even higher, and it's a real concern in terms of impact of fuel poverty. And absolutely, we have to do everything of every political perspective to try and protect our people in that time. There are certain constraints in what you can do. If I can tell you, it's very interesting. I had a meeting with the Irish Road Haulage Association on Tuesday where we were discussing at length what can we do, recognising that we had already, in their case, introduced a licensed hauler support scheme, €100 for every truck a week for those 8-week periods to help through incredibly difficult times, to try and counter some of the inflationary effect. And they were asking, as you've been asking, in terms of could we cut excise further? To explain why that isn't an option, we have to follow European law. European Energy Taxation Directive sets a minimum, if I can explain it, sets a minimum 33 cent a litre tax. prior to the war, our rate was 53 cents a litre, excise, the vast majority of the tax, or with the largest rate in VAT, the largest element of the tax. We reduced it by 15 cents a litre. There is, as you know, for the haulage sector, a further diesel rebate, a further 7.5%. That brings you down to 33.04 cents. So there are certain areas you can't manoeuvre. There are certain areas you do have to stick to the law. We were talking to hauliers to see are there other ways we can support people through this difficult time. And the same with all. A motorist, they have to do, they're there, no one is pointing the finger or blaming. We recognise people have to take journeys, have to have choices. We do have to do what we did to try and help with the alternatives, to cut public transport fares by 20%, or for those under 24 by 50%, so that if the alternative, at least to try and help in that way. And we'll continue to do that. But this is not easy. Most of the measures we're going to have to do are probably through the social welfare system, and it's not just those on social welfare basic rates, but it's the like of working family payment and others, so that those families who aren't in just receipt of social welfare, they have their wage, they're the ones we have to particularly target. There's some good ESRI analysis showing Minister O'Brien, I think, was informing me about this, and it's that sort of targeted supports we're going to have to do in the budget. Many of them may be one-off because it's, please God, a one-off. This war will not last forever. But we all recognise that that needs to be done, and we're doing it in a variety of different ways.
Deputy Murphy.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks, Karen Corley. But, Minister, while your objectives, I have no doubt, are well-intentioned, and I applaud your aspiration, but while I try to understand it, and I'm not sure that you understand the unintended consequences of your lack of action. And if you were living in the Hook Peninsula off of County Wexford, and you had to drive to Wexford every day to work, you would have no use telling that person that they can use public transport and it'll be reduced. There is none. You will have no use telling the carer who might cover as much as 30 to 40 kilometres on their day in visiting those most in need of our support at home and incapacitated. That carer now is giving up work. And all I can say is that the question is why we're not doing something to prevent this. And I'm sorry, Minister, you are completely offside when you say that we cannot control our own excise duties. I have listened in relation to VAT, and I accept that the EU may have governance over our VAT regime, but they do not have it over our excise duties, carbon tax and ORA levy, all of which you can remove and have not. And I have to say, Chair, when we have people who are drawing social welfare because they do not feel the need to go hungry or to freeze in their own homes. And you heard the Minister himself say, we will look after those on social welfare, and that's where we will drive them to social welfare.
Thank you very much, Minister, to conclude.
Just on the carbon tax, one other thing has changed in the last week. European Energy Council last week, the Council of Ministers committed to introduce an effective Europe-wide carbon tax on transport and home buildings. Got up to about €50 a tonne, I think, is what the Parliament recommends. It has to go through negotiations with the Parliament, but there's no one expecting that that would be reversed. So Europe will be going to introducing it already as a carbon tax on the industrial side. It will now introduce it on the domestic and in the transport side. Ireland will not be included. We get a derogation because we've already gone in that direction. But if we were to change tack, I was saying this, we had a meeting with the Transport Committee yesterday, if we were to give up on the carbon tax or not have a similar sort of scale and measure, the first thing we would have to do is to start paying the European one. And then we wouldn't have the funding that comes from that currently to support the retrofitting of our homes, to provide targeted social welfare increases, to help small farmers out. And it was extraordinary that we were able to get a derogation from that European proposal. And secondly, if I can, for those in Hookhead, what every representative in this, chamber and in the councils around the country should engage in is the new Connecting Ireland Rural Bus Transport Plan, which I think has potential to be transformative, to provide new services so we do have options in rural Ireland. That's where I'm hoping to put money in the budget, because it is, I think, our #1 transport priority.
Very good.